So, what are the Russians up to again, ladies and gentlemen? They had a parade. We watched it here together with the chat. And I have to say that this parade was one of the weakest I've ever seen. And definitely the weakest, smallest, and most miserable parade of the Russian army ever held on Red Square. Really, there hasn't been a worse parade on Red Square in the last 100 years or so. Why? Why did all this happen, and what's the broader context around that parade? Oh, by the way, spoiler, no drones showed up, but there's more context around the parade. Why was it so small? What should we take from it, and so on? The first thing, the elephant in the room that needs to be mentioned, is that you can't have small parades in Russia and pretend that you're strong. Yeah, some people tend to say, hey, what if they did a small parade just because it's the 81st anniversary? They don't want to make it unnecessarily expensive, right? Just simple pragmatism. Besides, they want to show us that they're actually weak so that we think they're weak, so we underestimate them, and then they'll show us they're strong because tigers will sneak through the taiga, terminators will arrive, and armatas will roll over the hills, and hell will break loose. Hele, tohleto není pravda. That's not possible because Russia simply doesn't work like that. Russia can't work on showing that it's weak just to look strong. You don't hold a military parade just to show that you have nothing to show at it. That doesn't make sense. If, for example, someone wanted to say that Russia wanted to appear weaker than it is, then maybe they wouldn't hold the parade at all or something like that. But when you do hold a military parade, you do it to show some strength in your own way, or to maintain a tradition, or to hold a ceremony. Secondly, Russian leader Vladimir Putin can be many things. He can be insane, he can be cruel, he can be crazy, he can simply be aggressive, he can start wars. The Russian leader can do all of this, and it was true 200 years ago, 100 years ago. That hasn't changed today. The Russian leader can do anything, but what can't the Russian leader do? The Russian leader can't appear weak. So Vladimir Putin, if he didn't have to, if he wasn't forced by the operational situation on the battlefield, would never hold a military parade where he would intentionally appear weak. In other words, the situation is such, the reality is such, that the operational situation on the battlefield did not allow the Russians to hold a larger military parade. So they had to balance between showing off their strength here and prioritizing resources for the battlefield itself. Because, of course, organizing a military parade is not that simple. It's not like working with a compass, kids. Organizing a military parade isn't just about bringing the soldiers there, bringing the equipment there, and just having it all there. Of course, if the Russians wanted to, they could rustle up some tanks for that square. They could rustle up some vehicles. But the problem is that it would be too logistically demanding. The Russians, the Ukrainians are targeting their logistics. The logistics are already stretched as it is, and if you wanted to move some combat equipment and these kinds of things there, you would need a lot of transport vehicles. You need people to drive them, people to service them. You have to transport it there, then you have to transport it back again, and you have to secure the transport itself. And so on and so on and so on. So the whole situation of transporting military equipment to Moscow is extremely logistically demanding. And considering the operational situation on the battlefield, it's very foolish to do this, and it would be very difficult to accomplish. Therefore, they preferred to at least be able to do something on the battlefield rather than show strength. But the very fact that they had to balance like this and choose priorities and weren't even able to make some kind of compromise so that the parade would at least have some presence and some strength shows that Russia is weakening. It is really weakening a lot, and their strength and their ability to operate logistically and focus on multiple places at once is declining. Well, of course, to organize a proper military parade, it's not just about logistics and these things. It's also about planning it and dedicating some resources to it. And the bigger the parade is, the more human resources that plan things have to be dedicated to it. And it's much better if the people who are capable of planning things and commanding others at that time focus on the operational situation rather than spending their time on a parade when you can't properly focus on everything. Another thing that's quite important about the whole parade is that really no drone flew in, but what's crucial is that air defense systems were pulled in around Moscow. Why were they pulled back? Air defense systems? Well, because the Ukrainians had been building a narrative the whole time that they might attack the parade. That narrative was supported, for example, by the fact that the Ukrainians attacked Moscow a few days before the parade, and that, for instance, Zelensky refused a ceasefire just for the parade, saying he wouldn't be a prop for Russian propaganda, which is completely understandable. But the very refusal of the ceasefire and the attacks on Moscow just days before the start of this parade actually showed that the Ukrainians could easily attack the parade. By creating that fear and atmosphere of risk, they forced the Russian authorities to pull more air defense systems to Moscow to secure the whole ceremony, the whole event. And by doing that, of course, the Russians exposed some other places across Russia. So as a result, the Ukrainians will probably be able to attack those places more successfully, the ones the Russians exposed by moving their air defense systems to Moscow. So no, the attack on Moscow didn't happen. It wasn't even planned, but the whole event and all the fear around the possibility of an attack on Moscow was used and will be used to make an attack happen somewhere else. That's basically the situation around the Russian parade. In the end, the only thing left to say is that Robert Fico wasn't on the reviewing stand, probably because he realized very well that it wouldn't look good for him at all to be present at such a masquerade, and that it wouldn't help him in any way. At the same time, though, he wanted to honor the memory of the unknown soldier, so once again he's balancing between Russia and Europe, Russia and Ukraine. He's trying to balance it, and this time he managed it in such a way that he wasn't on the reviewing stand, he wasn't directly present at the parade, but he was in Moscow and took part in certain celebrations. Of course, the celebrations aren't just about the military parade. There are also some commemorative events and political events, and of course, foreign guests also attended. What's interesting, though, is that there were really very few foreign guests. Of course, I don't want to deny the significance of the fact that the 80th anniversary is the 80th anniversary, which means it was the biggest, with the most guests, the most important. I understand that. But the 81st anniversary is just as important as, say, the 78th anniversary, right? And even for the 78th anniversary, far more foreign delegations came, far more foreign guests, and there was much greater political participation, which was not the case this time. What should we take from that? We take from that the fact that the current position of Vladimir Putin and Russia in the world is not good. What I mean is that it's not even a particularly current topic. It's not an issue that's important for anyone or for most politicians, and as a result, Russian influence is declining. At the same time, if we look at Europe, and we'll analyze this in more detail in the next video, Russian influence is declining throughout Europe, which is quite paradoxical. We'll talk about how Russian influence was lost in Hungary, how it was lost in Slovakia, how it never really took hold in the Czech Republic, what's happening in Germany with the AfD, which is kind of a Russian fifth column, but doesn't have much of a chance, and what about France, Bulgaria, and Romania. In short, we'll look at why Russian influence is declining and also why there were so few guests in the end, when in previous parades there were many more and it was much bigger, much more impressive, and much more representative. Let me sum it up. Very weak, maybe even a bit funny, and honestly, if the Russians hadn't held a parade at all, or if they had done the kind of parade where you just use a smaller space and only let ceremonial units march through and so on, it would have looked much better. When you send just a few soldiers onto Red Square, a huge area that represents a large part of Russian history, from Imperial Russia through Soviet times to modern Russia, and you hold such a big event there with only a handful of soldiers, it feels like when you're writing a thesis or a report and you just increase the font size to make it fill the required number of pages. It looks really silly, you know? If they didn't hold the parade, or if they did it in a much smaller, more intimate way somewhere else, it would look much better than trying to create something monumental with a minimum number of soldiers and people. They couldn't hit that sweet spot, and in the end, the only thing this parade will probably have a positive impact on, and what they probably achieved with it, the reason they likely did it, was just to make it look like things are kind of okay, that things are still somewhat normal, and to maintain a sense of stability and continuity. You could effectively say that this parade was basically the same reason TV stations keep rerunning the same shows day after day or year after year, because they're trying to create some sense of stability, a feeling that the thing is still there, so actually it's still okay. Yeah, it's like if they suddenly cancelled Ulis or Ordinas v Ruzhové Zahradě, which I don't know if it's still running, but Ulis is definitely still on. If they suddenly canceled Ulis, people would start asking what the heck happened, right? So theoretically, it's quite likely that they tried to make the parade the way they did, even though it looked ridiculous and stupid, just so they wouldn't have to cancel it and people wouldn't start asking too many questions about what the heck is going on, like why is there suddenly no parade, or why is it suddenly different, why is it suddenly small, and so on. By doing it this way, maybe at least they're keeping some kind of continuity and don't look like they're totally screwed. So that's that. That's one possibility. Please write in the comments how you liked the parade, because we were really amused by all of it. And how did it affect you? What conclusion do you draw from it? And if you're buying the whole, sure, the Russians are strong, they're just showing weakness line because you need to stay in your old world where you saw Russia as strong and that change scares you. Or are you trying to look at it in some innovative, progressive, liberal, free, or any other way you want to describe it? All right, support the creators, have a great time, join the streams, and I'll see you next time. See ya.